Hello and welcome to another AIC video. I just finished my 1 month of using an 11-year-old computer as my only computer. And honestly, this experience has been fine. I've had just a handful of, I don't even want to call them issues, but just some things to note with this process. I did have one technical issue, but that was a known issue before I even started, and I did live stream swapping out the touchpad, which was the left button here was faulty on my old touchpad. And really, my life has just been a little bit slower than what I'm used to with my newer systems. There were also some frustrations, such as there was a Windows update that I could not install because Windows, of course, blocked being able to run that update on older systems. So I had to go through the process of downloading Windows Media Creation Tool, using Rufus or using that to create an ISO, then using Rufus to create a bootable USB from that ISO. None of that was hard or difficult, just a bit more tedious than what you're used to if you're used to running Windows. And really, that's the whole video. If you're planning on doing something similar, or if you already have one of these computers laying around, and not necessarily this one specifically, but if you have a computer that's 5, 6, 7, 10 years old that's still in good shape and has at least a Core i5 or Core i7 processor in there, I wouldn't be trying this with a Celeron or even necessarily an older Pentium processor. But if you have an older system and it's still in good nick, I don't see why you have to not use it in this day and age. Now, I would not recommend going out and buying an older laptop simply because I don't think, looking at online prices right now, that you save enough money to justify that. I'm saying for people who already own something like this, or if you're a real diehard enthusiast, I don't think that you should let it hold you back at all. Now, what did I do during my month of computer use, using this as my almost only computer? We'll talk about that a little bit towards the end. We did a lot of web browsing. Obviously, I think that's what 99% of people do on their computers anymore, is all web-based stuff, including streaming video. Second thing I was doing is editing videos and writing scripts, and we did a little bit of gaming on the side here. I think, like I said, that's a pretty typical use case for most people. Again, just about anything you do is a web app anymore. One of the things that I did definitely run into as a potential issue on this system, and it might have caused some of the hiccups we had when having quite a few web browsers open, is it is just limited to 16 gigs of RAM. I do have two 16 gig DIMSO of DDR3L memory coming. I ordered that actually when I started this, hoping it would be here kind of halfway through, so I could do a compare and contrast. It's being slow boated from China. I think it's going to be another week or two before it shows up, unfortunately. So once it does show up, I will redo some of the things I was doing on here, and just, if there's much of a difference, I can definitely let you know if it's worth upgrading to 32 gigs of RAM. I'm going to assume that it probably is, but the cost is so high. That's what really gets you. It was $90 for the 2 sticks of RAM. But like I said, memory's kind of an issue. I restarted this computer, opened a couple tabs, closed them. We're sitting at 27% memory used, and I've closed everything. The only thing I have open right now is my task manager and my settings window. And we're sitting at almost a third of the memory used. Once you start opening up quite a few web pages, that consumption goes up pretty quickly. And I often sat between 60 and 80% memory utilization. So definitely something to consider if you are a pretty web browser heavy person. If you'd like to have a bunch of tabs open, modern web browsers really suck down the RAM, and it might be an issue for you. And of course that affects streaming videos. I'm bad. I like having videos streaming in the background while I work. Since I work from home, I'm often here by myself. Having a podcast or an audiobook playing in the background is kind of a sanity check for me. And bouncing between tabs in the browser, not even touching the one playing the video, will cause playback to pause, stutter for a few seconds, or even a full minute while it tries to catch up on that video. Again, I believe that's something to do with how much memory it has. I never really saw much of a spike in RAM or CPU utilization in doing that. So it could be either, and it just wasn't enough for me to see it on my screen. If I wanted to watch something on Amazon Prime or Netflix, which could be a little bit higher of a bit rate, it would actually be a little bit worse than stuff on YouTube would be. If that's all I'm doing, if all I'm doing is watching a movie on Netflix, it's not a problem. It's really when I had a bunch of tabs open and I was bouncing between them. Something I tend to do, especially if I'm like writing a script and I'm trying to do some research on a topic and try to get a little bit more information. And so I'll be listening to YouTube while bringing up web pages to look at. Editing videos was a true Herculean effort. I use the same software I've used for years and the same version I use on my desktop. Despite having dedicated graphics card, I get zero benefits from it for the video editor. It's simply not supported and doesn't have the encoding capabilities that newer cards are able to provide. The software I use has a feature where it creates a smaller copy of the video you're using to be able to like scrub through the video and stuff faster. The process usually takes moments on my desktop computer to create. On this guy, it took like 30 minutes at least to create that small file. And that's for like a 10-minute video. Normally I can drop my tracks into the editing software and get working right away. On this machine, that was a no. I had to wait until it was done creating that file. And exporting was a similar story, something that would have taken between 5 to 15 minutes. The export on my desktop took in excess of an hour on this laptop. And a lot of that is due to the fact that the dedicated GPU in here doesn't do any assistance with the editing of the video, where on my desktop and on my P1, both GPUs do some of that work, offloading from the CPU, making the process significantly faster. Now, I don't do YouTube for the money. I really do it for myself, and so I don't even ask people to subscribe. But if video editing was my main paid gig, this laptop would be a killer. And a faster computer, a newer computer, would pay for itself several times over in the time saved in creating content. One of the biggest things I've done on this computer is type. I've done quite a few scripts, emails, responding to work messages, things like that. And this has a pretty decent keyboard. But the problem I was having is, again, going back to when I have a lot of tabs open, which I typically do when I'm looking stuff up, and bouncing between tabs, there's a few times where I'd be typing and I was actually typing faster than the computer could kind of follow me, which is something I haven't really experienced in a long time. And it really threw me off and required me to go back and correct what I was typing. Again, I think that's a fairly unique use case for me, just because I tend to have so many web pages open while I'm writing and responding to messages and stuff. So your mileage on that may vary, and again, upgrading the RAM may fix that and be able to hold some of those web pages in RAM instead of having to reload them from the SSD. Gaming was fine. Like, you're not going to get new AAA titles on here to run, but Hollow Knight ran perfectly fine, and the newer Tomb Raider game was able to hit 30 frames per second. I did drop the resolution a little bit on there to be able to do that, but it was very playable and it looked great. And also this, at even being an 11-year-old laptop, it wasn't super powerful for its day, even when it was new. So if you just temper your expectations a little bit and play games that fall within its specs, it'll do just fine. And it's really quiet when doing it. The fan on this never gets very loud, and the laptop doesn't get very hot either, which is really nice. Over the last month, the few things I didn't do on this computer, obviously work. I have a work issued laptop. I have to do work issued things through that laptop for security and other reasons. So that really wasn't an option. Syncing my phone. I have a massive music library that I've been curating since I was a teenager, and I didn't want to mess with bringing that all the way over to this laptop and trying to resync my phone or anything. That wasn't really something I was willing to do. Another thing that I do a bit of is all my kids have iPhones, some of which don't even have cell service. Apple has pretty good parental controls. It's really easy to manage those through the iOS. So I have my MacBook Air for that. So I had to make some changes on some accounts, so I use my MacBook Air for that. The one thing that almost broke me and caused me to end my experiment early was shopping for some upcoming trips. I had a lot of web pages open for different airlines, Airbnbs, hotels, car rentals, my calendar, emails, things like that, because I have a couple of work trips, a couple family trips, and then my wife is taking a trip with one of our kids later this summer. And then, trying to match with people's schedules so we can meet up with people on these trips and stuff. So I just had a lot of information going, and it really pushed this laptop to its limits, bouncing back and forth between the different web pages. I also couldn't have more real estate. I tried using an external monitor, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it didn't work the way I needed it to, and so I almost gave up. So I was able to get done what I needed to, but it was definitely a frustrating moment for me. Again, I ran into very few actual problems. Trackpad, which I've already mentioned. Oh, and in my live stream, there was a black thing on the bottom of the trackpad that ended up being the NFC reader. That's something I've never used on a laptop, so I'm not going to miss it. This touchpad did not come with that NFC reader. Again, Windows updates, that was a bit annoying. I only had to do that once, but it's something that you have to go back and check because they don't tell you. You just notice that you don't have the latest updates if you care about that sort of thing and take the time to actually look into it. So that's something that if you're using Windows 11, you'll need to spend some time doing and looking into. And then the other real issue other than trackpad is the using an external monitor. This obviously has a display port out, not HDMI. Got that here. And my monitor that I have for my desktop also uses DisplayPort, so it shouldn't have been an issue. And it's a 1440 display, 144 hertz. It's 27 inches, and I really like that monitor. It means I get a lot more real estate to look at stuff while I'm working on things. But it wouldn't display the higher resolution out of this system. I know the cable can support it because it's the cable I use with my desktop, and it has no issues with my desktop. But when I plug the laptop in, it only do 1920 by 1080. And if you come into the display settings, the scale and display resolution and orientation, all that was grayed out. I don't know if that was a driver issue or just general incompatibility. Not quite sure, but yeah, this would not display the higher resolution at all. And it should have been able to. This graphics card does support QFHD, which is 3840 by 2160 at 60 hertz. So it seems like I should have been able to do at least that, but I couldn't. Now, as far as performance goes, again, this isn't what I need personally on my day-to-day. I've been very spoiled, especially with editing videos. I'm not going to edit this video on this laptop. If I ever want it to get out, I need to edit it on another machine. But again, if you already have this computer, if it's already sitting on your shelf and you just need a computer that works, go through the process of upgrading it to Windows 11. There's no reason not to, I think. I think for most people, you're going to have a great working laptop, as long as it's already that. You just don't try to do this with something that's already struggling with Windows 10. Don't go out and buy one necessarily unless you find a smoking deal on it and it does fit your needs as far as the performance goes. And I look forward to throwing the 32 gigs of RAM in here and kind of doing a little bit of a follow-up on here. RAM prices are kind of crazy right now, and $90 for 32 gigs of RAM really isn't that bad of a price compared to what DDR4 and especially DDR5 costs. So it may be worth looking into down the road. So if you have any thoughts or questions about my month experiment with this, I'll be happy to answer those questions. Should I do it again? I have a T440p and a W530 floating around. I could do this again. The W530 does have 32 gigs of RAM because it has 4 RAM slots. The T440p, I released a video that you might have seen on my channel where I got a new motherboard for it, so it also will have dedicated graphics on there, so a more fair comparison. Anyways, thank you for watching. Hopefully you found this entertaining, and I hope you have an amazing day.